This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can visit their store by using my referral link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Nizzanews, and today is Sunday, and that means it's time for Nizzanews. This is a vlog series I put out on Sundays where there was, a news story or two in the Magic world that I wanted to give my take on, and that's what I want to do today, in particular with the banning of the Meathook Massacre in Standard and the banning of Yorion in Modern. Obviously, I have my history of the banned and restricted list, which in a couple of years will also look at these cards, but that'll be more of a retrospective to see, how we feel about those bans 2 years later and stuff. And this is obviously sort of my unscripted take on those bans. And I think they're both pretty unique bans in the history of Magic, because neither of them was banned because that card itself was dominating a format, at least not entirely. So let's dive in and talk about these bans and what Wizards of the Coast had to say about them. So, Meathook Massacre first. So, it's banned in Standard. It is a super powerful card. Not only is it an effective board sweeper, but the fact that it gains you life and damages your opponent is great. And the Massacre, as a card, completely makes it so that black decks basically don't have to worry about aggro decks because they have this powerful play that will wipe their board and usually also gain some significant life, making it very hard for the deck to come back. So it is a great card, but it's interesting that they didn't say, the Meathook Massacre is banned because it is the card that's making black decks really good. Instead, what they basically said is, black is too good now in Standard, and we had to think about what card we wanted to ban. Or as they write it, as the format has settled into place, post-rotation that is, the color black has proven powerful and prolific, and makes up the foundation of many of the top decks. And then they straight up say, we discussed several different options as no single black card stood out as a major power outlier played by all decks containing black. So that's interesting. They're trying to keep people from playing a particular color, and not because a certain card is, dominating and making all these black decks good. This is something we've sort of seen before, especially with 1 mana cantrips like Ponder and stuff in Modern, where the card is banned because it is used in a whole bunch of different decks and makes a whole bunch of different decks too good, but it was still a card that was played in all blue decks. So even then, it's not really the same thing. So basically, they decide to ban the Meathook Massacre because it is in some of the black decks, and in particular, they point out, as is true that I just mentioned, that basically if you're a small creature deck, you are getting sort of hedged out of the format by decks running the Meathook Massacre. It is interesting, the powerful black cards in Standard right now. Another one that comes to mind is, of course, Shieldred. But just like the Meathook Massacre, not all these decks are playing Shieldred. Wizards of the Coast, of course, has a history of trying their hardest not to ban really new cards, and that, money is a reason for that. They want people to be more willing to buy booster packs when they know a card isn't banned. And I'm not saying Shieldred necessarily has to be banned, but, it's also an incredibly powerful card, and while Meathook Massacre has been quite good, Shieldred is, the new card for the deck that has powered it up, in addition to rotation powering it up too. But either way, the Massacre is strong, and it was keeping certain decks out of the format, and they don't like that. Aggro decks should be relevant, and Meathook Massacre made that a lot harder. So that's the Meathook Massacre. Let's talk now about the modern ban of Yorion, Sky Nomad, which I think is an even more interesting ban, particularly because it calls to mind the banning of a card like Sensei's Divining Top from back in the day. So Yorion, of course, is a companion. I've talked about, I have a top 10 on companions. I've talked about the companion mechanic being busted, and it needed power level errata, something they almost never do anymore, because originally the mechanic just let you cast the card from exile, or your sideboard, I guess. You sort of a command zone area. And they had to change that because it was utterly ridiculous, and you had to now pay 3 mana to put the card into your hand before you can cast it, which both slows down when it can happen in terms of mana investment, and also means if it's open to being disrupted, so your opponent can make you discard it or whatever, which they used to be completely immune to. So Yorion is a really fascinating companion. I think it's really cool that Yorion, people looking at this card when it was revealed, it's like, no way it's worth running like 20 extra cards in my deck just to have this companion. Well, it turns out it is, and that's just how good these companions are. You effectively start with them in your opening hand, and then they usually have synergy with your whole deck, as Yorion often does. So Yorion makes you play a larger deck than normal, and while the Yorion decks in Modern have been good, as they note in the announcement, about 5 to 6% of the metagame is Yorion decks. That's not a ton, but that's kind of high. Modern has pretty high deck diversity for the most part, and that's relatively high for Modern, but not insane. But the point is, it's not Yorion's power that got it banned. As they say here, as tabletop Modern play continues to rebound since the height of the pandemic, we've decided to enact a change that we've been considering for some time by banning Yorion Sky Nomad. So the question is, why does it matter if people are playing more paper Magic? How does that affect Yorion? And they go on to say that, yes, the deck is powerful and popular, but the main factor here is the physical dexterity requirements of playing with a large deck for tabletop. We're wary of the metagame reaching a point where players are playing the deck because of its perceived strength and win rate, despite not enjoying how cumbersome it can be to operate, which is really interesting. Basically, what they're saying is, having to shuffle this deck all the time is going to be a pain. It's going to be slow. It's going to slow things down. Things are going to get problematic if this deck continues to grow in popularity and more people go back to playing Modern in paper. Modern shuffles the deck a ton. You have fetch lands, you have all sorts of other stuff too. So you're shuffling your deck all the time, and they don't like the idea of people taking all this extra time to shuffle up their deck, which would be necessary. And I make the Sensei's Divining Top comparison because that card, while it was good, Sensei's Divining Top, I'm sure it's on the screen, but it lets you filter through the top cards of your library. That's its main effect. And people would put the top in almost any deck because it was so good at improving your draws for such a low cost. And so everybody is using the top every turn, looking at the top three, reorganizing them. And that was a massive problem for Modern and other formats. And it slowed games down. And they don't want that to happen. Arena and Magic Online both sort of create much faster play experiences that are possible in paper. And I think they're a little worried of people going back to paper or maybe picking up Arena Magic during the pandemic on Arena and then going to play paper and then feeling really bogged down by having to shuffle this massive deck. So, it's a fascinating ban, one that doesn't have that many other similar bans. Sensei's Divining Top is the main one. Cards like Shahrazad and things like that were also banned because they slowed the game down, but nobody was really playing those. That's what makes it different. Like, they banned Shahrazad just to be careful because they don't want it ever showing up because it causes, you have to play a sub game, an entire extra game of Magic that has an impact on your main game of Magic, as confusing as that is, and that takes a ton of time. The difference is cards like Yorion and Sensei's Divining Top were powerful enough to see play and also came with this added problematic difficulty in terms of using up time and making people take more time to play rounds of Magic. And they conclude their announcement by saying, therefore, to make Modern as fun and accessible as it can be for all types of players, Yorion Sky Nomad is banned in Modern. So, in that final sentence in the announcement, they don't even mention its power level or anything. They're worried about accessibility. They're worried about slowing things down. So that's all I wanted to talk about this week. Both these bans are really interesting because, neither of them are bans that people in the community were really calling for, like, in large numbers. Nobody was asking for either of these cards to be banned, but banning both of them probably is better for each of these respective formats. So that will do it for this edition of Nizzanews. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it. If you want to watch my history of the banned and restricted list, you should see the playlist on your screen shortly. Same for if you want to see more episodes of Nizzanews. I've also got a lot of other Magic content. I put out a video almost every day, and you can, find something for whatever kind of Magic you like to play. So subscribe if you want to catch that, and I'll see you all in the next video. Thanks for watching.